All right, we're ready to start. So, hello, everybody. I'm Maya. I'm founding engineer at 14AI.
Hi everyone, I'm Marie, co-founder and CEO. Excited to welcome everyone.
And I'm excited to present to you the second workshop of our workshop series called Advanced Prompting for AI Support Agents. It's the advanced portion of our prompting series. In this workshop, you're going to level up your prompting skills to build reliable AI support agents, and you're going to learn how to handle edge cases and master system prompt design. So before we get started with the content, share in the chat where you're calling from and your favorite sport. From Portugal, welcome. From Denver, hockey, amazing. San Francisco, berries. Switzerland, tennis. Nashville, basketball. This is great. Seattle, golf. Sandra from San Francisco, ice hockey. Wow, love all the locations and all the different sports. Thank you for sharing.
What's your favorite sport, Maya?
My favorite sport right now, let's say tennis. Great. So before we get started with the rest of the workshop, we want to start with our philosophy on prompting. So at 14AI, we believe that prompting is the future, and we believe that prompting will become the primary way people interact with software, not with buttons or with clunky dashboards, but with precise instructions to intelligent systems. In the future, this will be how teams automate workflows, how they build internal tools, and even how they define product behavior. Learning how to prompt well is a fundamental skill, as critical as knowing how to search or to write code. So for this workshop, what you'll need is a notepad or a doc. Make sure to have something ready to take notes and practice writing prompts. Bring your curiosity. So bring your questions and share them in the chat whenever anything comes up. We'll be monitoring and responding the entire time. And also, if you didn't join or if you did join the workshop last week about prompting, we will paste the link in the chat right now. So you have that as a reference guide as we're going through these more advanced topics. For our workshop curriculum, we're going to start with prompt layer architecture. Then we're going to move on to system prompt fundamentals. Then we're going to do a bit of prompt analysis. We're going to discuss edge case handling. We are also going to talk about iteration methods for systematically improving your prompts. We're going to have a little introduction to tool calls, and then we're going to finish off with a discussion on meta prompting, and we'll present with you reusable templates that you can use day to day in your support workflows to create better prompts. To get started with prompt layers. So a prompt can have three parts: system, context, and user. So for the system prompt, this is the instruction set that defines how the agent should behave. You can think of it like an onboarding document or a playbook. And for the context, this is the additional background information that the agent can use to inform its response. Think of it as the memory or supporting materials that the agent can see as context alongside the prompt. And then we have the user. So this is live input from the user, which can often be messy or unclear, and it is what the agent is reacting to in real time. So these all together make up the layers of a prompt. Some system prompt essentials. So what is it? You can think of it as a rulebook defining agent behavior, and its purpose is to have instructions for agent operation. In terms of components, system prompts usually include role definition, goal specification, constraints, output format, and fallback instructions for when input is unclear or for when things go wrong. How do you go about creating a system prompt? So you want to first start with an outline. So you can start with bullet points, defining your role, defining your tasks, formats, and fallbacks, as we discussed in the previous slide. Once you have these bullet points, once you have these beginning sentences, you can take this to ChatGPT and use it as a co-writing partner. So you can generate a first draft from the outline. Then it's time to test and identify failures. So you're going to want to run real scenarios to find weaknesses in your prompt and see where your prompt fails. You're going to also want to refine and improve. So once you have all this information about where your prompt is failing, you can add stricter rules based on test results. And then you can iterate. This is an iterative process. So once you have all that information about where things go wrong, you can make better prompts. And it's like a little cycle like this. Now let's start with our exercise, which is what are common system prompt failures? Share your ideas in the chat. We're going to be discussing what this is in the next slide. I'm just really curious to hear everyone's thoughts and ideas before we continue. We have contradictions in the prompt. Yes, that can definitely create ambiguity and failures. Not well defined, vague prompts. Exactly. These are great responses. So moving on to what's a list of common system prompt failures? Mixed signals, so contradictory instructions can create confusion. Missing fallback, so no guidance for handling vague input. So it's really important to deal with that. Over prompting. So what we've seen happens is that when we have too many rules in a system prompt, it can actually dilute the effectiveness in the prompt. And that's where your comments on vague prompts, that's where it can come in as well. Because if you have so many instructions, it's actually hard to be quite specific. And then prompt drift. So performance can also degrade as the number of edge cases increase. And we will dive into edge cases very soon. Here are some tips on creating reliable system prompts. So this is for educational purposes, we're going to be talking about a prompt for a triaging agent. So you want to start with you can start with a role declaration. For example, you are a triage agent. Then you're going to want to define your goal. So here, in this case, it's your job is to prioritize messages. And then constraints are output must be high, medium, or low. And then you're also specifying fallback behavior. So what happens if some information is missing? And here we want to say, if the info is missing, default to high. Let's talk about what good versus bad system prompts look like. So an effective prompt, this one clearly defines the agent's role and scope. It sets expectations for its tone, its style, or its behavior. It anticipates edge cases with fallback logic, and it aligns with the agent's function. So whether it's a triaging agent, whether it's a conversational agent, whether it's a summarization agent, it aligns with that. And problematic prompts. So problematic prompts, they leave the agent's role or task unclear. They use vague directions like be helpful. They omit instructions for ambiguous or incomplete input. And they include contradictions through conflicting goals or tone. For example, an instruction, casual voice with rigid structure. And it's really important to account for edge cases when we're designing our system prompts. So things you might not anticipate when your prompt is actually being used. So we want to anticipate for vague readings. For example, users might send generic messages like hi or something that is not related to the product. And multiple questions. You want to make sure that your prompt can handle compound requests clearly. What happens when a customer comes with an emotional tone? How are you going to address hostile or potentially sarcastic input? And also, what happens when you're missing context. So make sure to include fallback info, fallbacks for incomplete info. Let's move on to our next exercise. So this is a prompt rewrite exercise, edge case edition. For this exercise, you are going to be working with this prompt here. So you're a triaging agent tasked with assessing the urgency of the case. Your job is going to be improving the prompt with these specifications. So clarify edge cases, specify output format, and specify the default behavior of the agent. So take a little bit of time and we're going to read out the responses in the chat. Great, we have our first response. I'll give everybody a little bit more time. And also feel free to write any ideas you have, anything that is top of mind about this exercise as well. You can answer any questions. So let's go through this prompt that was shared. So it says, you are a triaging assistant that classifies incoming customer support tickets. So great, we're defining the role and the job. Your job is to assign a single category label from a predefined list. Output only the label with no explanation or additional text. So that's the output format. If the ticket is ambiguous or does not clearly fit into any category, output general inquiry. So that's addressing an edge case. And then we are specifying the different categories. So billing, all these categories. And we have only output one of the exact labels above. Do not infer additional categories or output freeform text. So that is constraining the response. Thank you so much. If anybody else has any questions or any ideas they want to share, feel free to add them in the chat. Otherwise, we will move. Thank you, Sandra.
Then John has where he just added one.
Oh, John, thank you. Thank you so much. Okay, let's read this prompt. So context. You are an AI triage agent reviewing incoming support requests. Each request arrives as a short free text description. Great. This is a great job setting up the context. Your task, assign and label the urgency of the request as critical, high, medium, or low. Very clear. Use the criteria below and return your answer in the required JSON format. This is also very clear and makes the output format very clear. Urgency criteria, label typical characteristic examples, critical safety, legal or data loss risk if action is not taken immediately within 1 hour. System, and you're giving an example. Great. High major business impact or customer outage requiring action today. Payment, for example, payment gateway down for all users. Medium degraded experience or partial failure. And then, for example, report export feature timing out occasionally. And then you gave an example for low or non-urgent questions. Wow, this is a really thorough prompt. Thank you, John. And then you have different edge case guidances. So you have things for conflicting signals. You have specification for what to do in a conflicting signal, for lack of detail. For example, if impact or time sensitivity is unclear, assume medium, multiple issues, user frustration, default behavior. This is an excellent example. Thank you so much for sharing that, John. Yes. Yeah, if everybody is taking a look at John's prompt, this is a very thorough example, and you specified, you gave examples, you output the default behavior. Excellent job. So now let's talk about how do we actually improve our prompts? what is the prompt improvement process like? So when you notice an issue with your prompt, you're going to want to log that failure. So capture the problematic user message and the response. Then with that information, you can diagnose the issue. So identify the specific failure point, what happened wrong, be very clear on what actually went wrong. And then given all this information, you can update your prompt. So you can add a constraint or a fallback clause, and you can again use ChatGPT to show, what went wrong and how, and you can actually update that iteratively. And then retest variation. So now it's time to verify your fix with several similar inputs. So you build confidence in the functionality of your prompt. And here's a pre-launch debugging checklist for when you actually want to use a prompt in production or share a prompt. Human readability. So you want to check, would a teammate be able to understand your instruction? Would it be clear to them, or would it still have ambiguities? Format clarity. Are the tone and the outputs clearly defined? Fallback coverage. Is there handling for vague inputs? Again, what do you do when things go wrong, when you have missing information? And also testing. Have you verified the functionality with several example inputs, several, vague inputs, several, for example, you can do reading inputs, and of course, inputs from what you would expect your customers to provide in a real setting. Now let's talk about tool calls. Let's do a brief introduction to tool calls. So tool calls let your AI agent do more than respond. They let it take real action by triggering internal tools or API. For example, here are some tools: reschedule appointment, issue a refund, which issues a refund, and look up order status. The agent must be explicitly told when and how to use them. And without these instructions, it might ignore the tool, hallucinate parameters, or call the wrong tool. In this case, your prompt becomes like the trigger logic for real world workflows. Here are some prompting tips for tool call use. So you want to use precise language to define when a tool should be triggered, establishing trigger conditions. For example, only if message mentions refund and order ID. How to use the tool. Clearly explain how to extract and map input values to the tool parameters. For example, extract order ID and pass to order ID parameter. Fallbacks. Define what the agent should do when required inputs are missing or unclear. For example, if ID is missing, tag manual review and escalate. And also guarding against hallucinations. Make sure to clearly define tool names, parameters, and usage rules to prevent the model from making up actions or inputs. For example, here we have this guard: do not use issue refund unless both refund and order ID are mentioned explicitly in the message. Now we have another exercise. So in this exercise, it'll be a tool prompt rewrite. And we're going to start with an original vague prompt about using this reschedule tool. And your requirements are going to be to improve this. So you're going to define trigger conditions, specify required parameters, and consider edge cases that could bias the behavior of this reschedule tool. So the prompt that we start with, the original vague prompt, is you can use the reschedule tool to reschedule things if needed. And we're going to take some time to write this, and make sure to share your improved prompts, your ideas below in the chat, and we'll go through them together. And we have an example here in the chat to help get you started. Great. So this one is: use this tool if the customer clearly requests to reschedule a meeting and includes a valid meeting ID. So this is the trigger conditions. extract the ID and pass it as meeting ID. So for we're specifying the required parameters, and then do not use if no meeting ID is provided. So this could be a potential edge case here. Thank you, John. Thank you. So this in your improved prompt, you said invoke reschedule tool when the original event conflicts with a new task, a user changes availability, or system alerts overlap. Great. This is very clear trigger conditions. So then for your required parameters, you said provide event ID, new date time, time zone, and a brief reason. Validate that new date time is future dated within allowed hours and not on a holiday. Otherwise, prompt for another slot or cancel. If event ID is missing or invalid, return an error. Yes, this is a very robust prompt. You defined the edge cases very clearly. You're very clear about the parameters, and you had several trigger conditions. Wonderful job. Sandra, thank you. So if the user requests to reschedule a meeting and includes a new date, use the new date as new date parameter to invoke reschedule tool. Great, thank you. Great specification here too. It's great to be thinking through these different edge cases, and thank you everyone for sharing them in the chat. If anybody else has any ideas, just feel free to add them, even if we're going through the next slides. If something still pops up, feel free to share it and we'll go through it together. So now we're going to be discussing meta prompts. So when you're tasked to write a system prompt from scratch, a good way to kick things off is to use a meta prompt. So what are meta prompts? A meta prompt is a prompt that generates another prompt. It can help you generate reliable system prompts by describing what the agent should do, how it should respond, and how to handle tricky cases. Meta prompts are especially useful when you are defining new agent behaviors, when you're troubleshooting unclear instructions, or when you're creating fallback logic for edge cases. And a tip that we have that we mentioned earlier, but still want to call out, is that ChatGPT is really good at converting your rough ideas into solid system prompts. So you start with that outline, you have an idea for the role of your agent, you have a few constraints, goals, and it can actually come out with a pretty good version 1 of your prompt, which you can then iterate on. And something that you can do is, and we will share a template very shortly, is that you can, for example, when you have a failure to your prompt, you can show it what the unexpected behavior is, and then ask it to regenerate a new system prompt based on failures that you observed. So now we're going to share 3 different meta prompt templates that you can use in your support workflows. So basically, so these are going to be sent in the prompting guide that we are going to paste in the chat at the end of the workshop. So this first one is for helping you to generate a system prompt from scratch. This next one right here can be used to help you rewrite an underperforming prompt and troubleshoot. So we start by saying the following system prompt is producing inconsistent or low quality results, and we task it to rewrite a better scope prompt that has a better structure and is more reliable. And the last template is a meta prompt for fixing a failing prompt based on observed behavior. Now, it's time for another exercise. So it's time to write your own meta prompt. So pick one of the following situations. Either you need a brand new system prompt for a summarization agent, you're fixing a draft prompt that is too vague, or you want fallback logic for tool use. So your task is going to be to write a meta prompt that would help ChatGPT generate a strong system prompt for that situation. This meta prompt should include the following: what is the agent for, what the output should look like, and what to do when input isn't clear. Share your meta prompt in the chat below, and we will be reading them together. Thank you. We have our first example, so you can consult this in the chat when you're coming up with your own. So create a system prompt for a summarization agent. The output should be 3 bullet points covering issue, progress, and next step. If the conversation is too short or unclear, output unable to summarize, avoid greetings, filler, or any formatting other than the bullet list. Thank you. And Sandra, thank you. So your prompt says, if the user requests to reschedule a meeting and provides a new date, first validate that the date is after tomorrow. If the date is valid and does not conflict with any existing events, use it as the new date parameter when invoking the reschedule tool. If the date is today, if in the past missing, invalid, or conflicts with an existing event, do not invoke the tool. Instead, prompt the user to provide a valid future date that does not overlap with schedule events. Thank you. Great. Thank you for sharing the fallback logic. This is very, very thorough. Very thorough. Very good job. We can move on. If anybody has any ideas, also feel free to share them in the chat, even if we move on from this slide. So what's next? Our next workshop is going to be next week in 1 week, June 25th at 9 a.m. Pacific, and we're going to be covering support workflows. So agentic workflows in support settings. And you can also use this time to practice on your own. So use our meta prompting guide to guide your own prompt design. Experiment, iterate, try creating system prompts for different types, edge cases, and tool calls. Start with a rough outline and then iterate. And also, we are going to be sharing our practical guide, so advanced prompting techniques for support agents in the chat, where you're going to be able to consult all of the content. You're going to have all of the meta prompt templates in there that you can use to practice with and build your prompt skills. And let's end with some key workshop takeaways. So having a documentation mindset. Think of system prompts like onboarding docs for your agent. So in terms of clarity, set the goals, set the roles, and employ best practices. Structure matters. Clarity and organization beat cleverness when creating these system prompts and meta prompts. Fallbacks are essential. Always keep in mind and always be planning for what happens when things go wrong. And in this workshop, thank you so much for your participation. You really demonstrated good thinking with regards to these fallbacks. I really liked all of the ideas that were shared in the chat. These are very thorough, and it's very important to be thinking like this. And continuous improvement. Use failures as learning opportunities. So every time your prompt fails on a user message or example, use this as a failure. Use this failure as a learning opportunity to create a better version of your prompt. Now we have a little bit of time for questions, and I just want to say thank you so much. Thank you for attending this workshop and participating. The templates are in the chat right now. So this is a link to our blog with the prompting guide for this workshop. And as always, you can reach out, contact us for feedback on your prompts, send them to team@14AI, and we're always going to provide feedback. Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much for attending. And again, thank you for joining our workshop today, and we hope to see you next week. Thank you, Wes. Thank you, Sajid. Thank you, Sandra. Thank you, everybody.